The first gunshot shattered the peaceful morning air outside Sweetwater, Texas, and Sarah Palmer threw herself against the dusty floor of the wagon, her heart hammering as her brother's voice shouted for the horses to run faster. It was March of 1872, and the journey from Missouri to Texas had already taken more from Sarah than she could bear. Her parents lay in graves along the trail, victims of cholera that swept through their small wagon train 3 weeks prior. Now it was just her and Thomas, her older brother by 5 years, racing toward what they hoped would be a fresh start on a small plot of land their father had won in a card game years before anyone could remember. The shots continued, but soon the wagon lurched forward with such speed that Sarah had to grip the wooden sides to keep from being thrown about. Thomas was shouting something she could not make out over the thundering wheels and her own pulse pounding in her ears. When the wagon finally slowed, she pulled herself up to peer over the edge, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. "Bandits," Thomas said, his face pale beneath the trail dust. "They were after the horses. We barely made it." Sarah looked behind them but saw only empty Texas prairie stretching toward the horizon. She turned back to her brother and noticed how his hands shook as he held the reins. Thomas had always been gentle, more suited to their father's carpentry shop than life on the frontier. Their mother used to say he had the soul of an artist trapped in a farmer's body. "How much further to the ranch?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Another hour, maybe less. We should reach it before nightfall." The ranch, when they finally arrived, was more ruin than homestead. The small cabin sagged to one side, its roof partly caved in from what looked like years of neglect. The barn was in better shape, but still showed signs of serious disrepair. Fencing lay scattered across the property like broken bones. Sarah felt her heart sink as she climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from days of travel. "Father never mentioned it was in this condition," Thomas said quietly. Sarah walked toward the cabin, pushing open the door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, dust covered everything, and evidence of animals having made the place their home was everywhere. A broken chair lay in pieces near a cold fireplace. Holes in the roof let in streams of fading sunlight. "We can fix it," Sarah said, though she felt doubt creeping into her chest. "We have tools, we have supplies. We can make this work." Thomas did not answer right away. He stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped. "Sarah, I don't know if I can do this. This place, this life, it is not what I thought. When Mother and Father were alive, I thought I could be strong enough, but now, we have nowhere else to go," Sarah reminded him gently. "Everything we have is in that wagon." They spent the next few days trying to make the cabin livable. Sarah swept and cleaned while Thomas attempted repairs to the roof. But she noticed how often he stopped to stare out at the vast emptiness surrounding them, how his hands fumbled with tools their father had wielded with ease. On the fourth night, as they sat by a small fire eating beans from a can, Thomas finally spoke what had been weighing on him. "I have been thinking about going back east," he said. "There is a man in St. Louis who offered me work in his printing shop before we left. I could make a decent living there, enough to send money back to you." Sarah set down her plate, fear rushing through her. "You want to leave me here alone?" "No, Sarah, that is the thing. You would come with me. We would sell this place or just abandon it and go back to civilization. You could find work as a seamstress or a teacher. You are educated enough. And give up on everything Mother and Father wanted for us." Thomas stood abruptly, his voice rising with frustration. "Mother and Father are dead, Sarah. Their dreams died with them. I am not cut out for this life. I wake up every morning terrified of the emptiness, of failing, of those bandits coming back. I cannot breathe out here." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes but refused to let them fall. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day we buried Mother," he admitted. "I only kept going because I thought once we got here, once I saw the ranch, something would change inside me. But it has not. If anything, I feel worse." They argued late into the night, their voices carrying across the empty prairie. Sarah pleaded with him to stay, to give it more time, to honor their parents' memory. But Thomas had made up his mind. By morning, he was packing his few belongings back into the wagon. "Come with me," he said one last time. "You do not have to stay here out of stubbornness." "It is not stubbornness," Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from crying and arguing. "This land is all I have left of them. If I leave, it is like saying their deaths meant nothing." Thomas looked at her with such sadness that for a moment she thought he might change his mind. Instead, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "You are stronger than me, Sarah. You always have been, but this place will break you. There is no shame in admitting when something is too much." "Then let me discover that for myself," she said against his shoulder. He pulled back and studied her face. "I will take the wagon and most of the supplies. It is the only way I can make it back, but I will leave you the horse, some food and tools, and I promise I will send money as soon as I am able." "Thomas, please," Sarah whispered, but she knew it was useless. She watched him drive away an hour later, the wagon growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the shimmering heat of the Texas landscape. Then she was alone with a broken cabin, a tired horse, and more fear than she wanted to admit. The first week alone was the hardest. Sarah worked from sunrise to sunset, trying to patch the roof, mend fences, clear the overgrown areas around the cabin. But every task seemed impossible without another pair of hands. The horse, an old mare named Daisy, needed care and feeding. The well needed repairs. The barn door would not close properly. At night, Sarah lay on the hard floor wrapped in blankets, listening to coyotes howling in the distance and wondering if Thomas had been right. She rationed the food carefully, but by the end of the second week, she knew she would have to go into town soon. Sweetwater was about 10 miles southeast, a half-day's ride. The thought of leaving the ranch unattended worried her, but she had no choice. On a bright Monday morning in early April, Sarah saddled Daisy and set out for town. The ride was longer than she expected, the sun beating down mercilessly. When Sweetwater finally came into view, she felt a rush of relief. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with shops and businesses. Cowboys and ranchers moved about their business, and she noticed several women in bonnets carrying baskets. Sarah tied Daisy to a post outside the general store and went inside. The proprietor, a round man with spectacles, looked her up and down with undisguised curiosity. "Help you, miss?" he asked. "I need supplies," Sarah said, pulling out the small amount of money she had left. "Flour, coffee, beans, and whatever else this will cover." The man counted her money and shook his head slowly. "This will get you maybe half of what you listed. Times are hard for everyone." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "That is all I have." "Where you from?" the proprietor asked, his tone not unkind. "The Palmer Ranch, about 10 miles northwest." His eyebrows rose. "That old wreck. Did not know anyone was living out there. My brother and I inherited it. Well, just me now. He went back east." The man studied her with a mixture of pity and concern. "Miss, that ranch has been abandoned for near about 8 years. It would take a crew of men months to get it running proper again." "Then I suppose I will have to work faster," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. She left the store with a small sack of supplies, her heart heavy. As she untied Daisy, a tall man in worn leather boots and a wide-brimmed hat approached her. He had dark hair, sun-weathered skin and eyes that were a striking shade of blue-green. She guessed him to be in his late 20s. "Pardon me, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "Could not help but overhear in there. You are trying to run the Palmer place by yourself." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "That is correct." "Name is Harrison James," he said, extending his hand. "I run the Double J Ranch about 15 miles south of your property. Been out here about 6 years now." Sarah shook his hand briefly. "Sarah Palmer. Miss Palmer, I do not mean to be forward, but that ranch is in no condition for anyone to live alone, let alone a woman by herself." "Have you got help coming?" "I can manage," Sarah said stiffly. Though she knew how absurd that sounded. Harrison studied her for a long moment, and she felt herself bristling under his gaze. She expected him to laugh or make some dismissive comment, but instead his expression softened. "I believe you have determination," he said carefully, "but determination does not fix a roof or mend fences. How long you been out there?" 2 weeks. "And you have made progress." Sarah wanted to lie but found she could not. "Some." Harrison glanced at the small sack of supplies in her hands. "That going to last you long, long enough?" He was quiet for another moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Miss Palmer, I have a proposition for you. My ranch needs help. I lost 2 of my hands last month, one to injury and another who just up and quit. I got cattle to manage, horses to train, and more work than I can handle alone. You come work for me. I will pay you fair wages and provide meals. You can keep your ranch and work on it during your time off." Sarah stared at him, unsure if she should feel insulted or grateful. "I do not know anything about ranch work. You can learn, you ride." "Well enough. You stronger than I look." A slight smile tugged at his mouth. "I believe that. What do you say? Better than starving out there alone." Pride warred with practicality inside Sarah. She knew she was in a desperate situation, but accepting help from a strange man felt dangerous in its own way. Still, what choice did she have? "What kind of work?" she asked. "Whatever needs doing. Feeding animals, mending tack, helping with the cattle, cooking maybe. I am not particular, and I do not expect you to do anything beyond your capability. I just need reliable help." Sarah looked down at her meager supplies, then back at Harrison James. His expression was open and honest, and something in her gut told her he was sincere. "All right," she said finally. "But I need to be able to go back to my ranch regularly to keep working on it." "Fair enough. You can take Sundays and 1 afternoon a week. We got a deal." They shook hands again, and Sarah felt a small measure of relief wash over her. At least she would not starve. At least she would not be completely alone. Harrison insisted on riding back with her to her ranch so she could gather what she needed. When he saw the state of the property, he let out a low whistle. "You have been living here?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I have been surviving here," Sarah corrected him. He walked around the cabin, inspecting the damage with a critical eye. "Your brother really left you here like this?" "He had his reasons," Sarah said defensively. Harrison did not press the matter. Instead, he helped her pack a small bag with her clothes and personal items. As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look at the sad little ranch. She had been so certain she could fix it, could make it into the home her parents had dreamed of. Now she was abandoning it, at least temporarily, to work for a stranger. The ride to the Double J Ranch took about 2 hours. Harrison did not talk much, but when he did, he asked her about her journey from Missouri and expressed genuine sympathy about her parents. Sarah found herself warming to him despite her initial wariness. There was something solid and dependable about him, a calmness that made her feel less afraid. The Double J was everything her ranch was not. The buildings were well maintained, the fences sturdy, the land clearly cared for. The main house was a sprawling single-story structure with a wide porch. The barn was enormous and well organized. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see a corral with several horses near the barn. "This is beautiful," Sarah said honestly. "Took years of hard work," Harrison said, dismounting. "My father started it. I have just been building on what he left me. Your father is gone, died 3 years back. Heart gave out during a cattle drive. My mother passed when I was 15. Been just me and hired hands since then." Sarah followed him into the house, which was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's home. The front room had a large fireplace, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. The kitchen was spacious and well equipped. "There is a room off the back that was my mother's sewing room," Harrison said, leading her down a hallway. "Ain't been used in years, but it has a bed and a window. You can have that." The room was small but clean, with a simple bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair near the window that overlooked the corrals. Sarah set her bag down and turned to find Harrison watching her from the doorway. "This will do nicely," she said. "Thank you. Get yourself settled, then come find me in the barn. Might as well start learning the routine." Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon following Harrison around the ranch as he explained the daily tasks. There was feeding to do morning and evening, stalls to muck out, tack to maintain, and endless repairs to keep up with. It was overwhelming at first, but Sarah paid close attention, determined to prove she could handle it. That evening, she cooked dinner for both of them from the supplies in Harrison's well-stocked kitchen. He seemed surprised by her cooking skills, and she felt a small flush of pride when he complimented the meal. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "My mother. She said a woman should know how to make a good meal from whatever she has on hand. She taught you well." They ate in companionable silence for a while before Harrison spoke again. "I want you to know, Miss Palmer, you are safe here. I know what people might say, a woman staying at a man's ranch unchaperoned, but I give you my word I will treat you with respect. You got your own room, your own space. This is just a work arrangement." Sarah met his eyes across the table. "I appreciate you saying that, and please call me Sarah." "Then you should call me Harrison." Over the next few weeks, Sarah fell into a routine at the Double J. She rose before dawn to help with morning chores, spent her days learning everything Harrison could teach her about ranch work, and fell into bed exhausted each night. Her hands grew calloused, her muscles ached, but she also felt herself growing stronger. Harrison was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes. He showed her how to properly saddle a horse, how to approach the cattle without spooking them, how to spot signs of illness in the animals. She learned to mend leather tack, to recognize good grazing land, to read the weather in the clouds. True to his word, Harrison let her return to her own ranch every Sunday. She would spend those days working on repairs, making slow but steady progress. Harrison often showed up in the afternoon with supplies or tools, insisting she take them since he had extra. Once, he brought lumber and spent several hours helping her patch the worst holes in her roof. When she protested that it was her day off and she did not expect him to work, he simply shrugged. "Good neighbors help each other," he said. "Besides, I cannot have you getting rained on." As spring turned toward summer, Sarah began to notice things about Harrison that made her heart behave strangely. The way he always made sure she ate enough at meals. How he insisted on taking the hardest physical tasks himself, rather than letting her struggle. The gentle way he spoke to his horses and cattle. His rare but genuine smiles that changed his whole face. The focused look in his eyes when he listened to her talk. She tried to push these feelings away, reminding herself this was just a work arrangement, that she was only here until she could get her own ranch running. But it became harder and harder to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he walked into a room, or the disappointment she felt on the days he had to ride out to distant pastures, and she did not see him until evening. One particularly hot day in June, Sarah was in the barn organizing tack when she overheard voices from outside. Harrison was talking to two men she recognized from town. "I am telling you, Harrison, people are talking," one of the men said. "It ain't right, you keeping that woman out here with no proper chaperone." "Sarah is my employee," Harrison replied, his voice tight. "What business is it of anyone else? Come on now, you know how it looks. Young woman living with a single man. You are going to ruin her reputation, if she has one left to ruin." "Watch your mouth," Harrison said sharply. "Sarah is a decent woman who found herself in hard circumstances. I offered her honest work, nothing more. Maybe so, but you should think about marrying her or sending her away. The way things stand now is not good for either of you." Sarah pressed herself against the barn wall, her face burning with shame and anger. She had been so focused on survival that she had not considered how the arrangement might look to others. When the men left and Harrison came into the barn, she was furiously shoving bridles onto their hooks. "Sarah," he said gently. "I heard," she said without turning around. "I should go. I am causing you trouble." "You are causing me no trouble. Those men are small-minded fools." "They are right, though. My staying here, it is not proper. I have been selfish, not thinking about your reputation." Harrison moved closer, and she could feel him behind her. "I do not care about my reputation. I care that you have a place to stay and work to do. I care that you are not alone out there struggling." "Why?" Sarah turned to face him, tears threatening to spill over. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Harrison looked at her for a long moment, something intense and vulnerable in his expression. "Because somewhere along the way, I started looking forward to seeing you every morning. Because watching you work so hard, never complaining, always determined, it makes me want to be better. Because when you smile, which is rare enough, it is like the sun breaking through clouds." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Harrison." "I know I have no right to say these things," he continued. "You are not here for that, but if I am being honest, those men were right about one thing. My feelings for you have become less than professional." "Less than professional," Sarah repeated, a strange giddiness mixing with her fear. "What does that mean exactly?" He stepped closer, so close she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "It means I have fallen in love with you, Sarah Palmer. And I know that complicates everything, but I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Sarah felt like the world had tilted sideways. This strong, quiet man who had shown her such kindness, who had taught her so much, who had never once made her feel less than capable, was in love with her. And the truth was, she had fallen for him too, though she had been too stubborn or scared to admit it. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything. I just needed you to know, especially if you are thinking about leaving. But Sarah, I meant what I said before. You are safe here. My feelings do not change that. If you want to stay on as just my employee, I will respect that." Sarah reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palm. "What if I do not want to be just your employee?" Hope flared in his eyes. "Then what do you want?" "I think I want you to kiss me." Harrison cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he feared she might break. But when Sarah pressed closer, wrapping her arms around his neck, he deepened the kiss, pulling her tight against him. It was everything a first kiss should be, full of promise and possibility and barely restrained passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Sarah." "What?" She pulled back to look at him. "I know it is sudden, but I am sure about this. I am sure about you. Marry me. Not because of what people say or what is proper, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. Sarah thought about everything she had been through, all the loss and hardship and fear. She thought about her parents and the dreams they had for her. She thought about her brother and his inability to stay. And she thought about this man who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had treated her with respect and kindness, who had never made her feel weak or incapable even when she had been both. "Yes," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I will marry you." Harrison kissed her again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. It was a kiss full of joy and relief and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. They were married 2 weeks later in Sweetwater's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that one of the ranch wives had helped her make. Harrison wore a new suit that he kept tugging at uncomfortably. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah felt something settle deep in her chest. She was home. Not at the broken-down ranch her father had won in a card game, but here, with this man who saw her strength when everyone else saw only her circumstances. The townspeople who had gossiped about them before now congratulated them warmly. The same men who had told Harrison to send her away now clapped him on the back and told him he was a lucky man. Sarah found it all rather hypocritical, but Harrison squeezed her hand and whispered in her ear that the only opinion that mattered was hers. They held a small celebration at the ranch with a few close neighbors. Sarah had spent the previous day cooking, determined to prove she could put on a proper wedding supper. The food was plentiful, the company was kind, and as the sun set and the guests finally departed, Sarah found herself alone with her new husband for the first time as a married woman. "Happy?" Harrison asked, pulling her close on the porch as they watched the last wagon disappear down the road. "Happier than I have been in a long time," Sarah admitted. "Scared too." "Of what?" "That I will wake up and this will all be a dream, that I am still back in that broken cabin trying to figure out how to survive alone." Harrison turned her to face him. "This is real, Sarah. I am real. Our life together is real, and I promise you, every single day I will do my best to make you happy." "You already make me happy," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. That night, as they lay together in the room that was now theirs, Harrison held Sarah close and told her stories about his childhood on the ranch, about his parents and their love for each other, about his dreams for the future. Sarah listened, her head on his chest, feeling safer and more content than she had ever felt. When she finally fell asleep in his arms, she did not dream of loss or hardship. She dreamed of the life they would build together. The weeks that followed their wedding were a period of adjustment, but also deep happiness. Sarah had already been working on the ranch for months, but now it truly felt like her home. She put her personal touches on the house, rearranging furniture, adding curtains, planting a small garden near the kitchen door. Harrison watched her transform the space with obvious pleasure, often stopping his work just to observe her. They settled into a comfortable rhythm together, working side by side during the day and falling into each other's arms at night. Sarah had never imagined that marriage could be like this, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Harrison asked her opinion on ranch decisions and listened carefully to her input. She, in turn, continued to learn everything she could about the land and the animals, determined to be a true partner in running the Double J. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set in shades of orange and pink, Harrison brought up the subject of Sarah's old ranch. "Have you thought about what you want to do with your property?" he asked carefully. Sarah had been thinking about it quite a bit actually. I feel like I should keep working on it, finish what I started. But honestly, Harrison, this is home now. That place, it represented something I needed at the time, but I do not need it anymore. You could sell it, Harrison suggested. Use the money to invest in the Double J, make this place even better. Or, Sarah said slowly, an idea forming, we could fix it up properly and offer it to someone who needs it the way I needed this ranch. Harrison looked at her with such warmth that she felt her cheeks heat. That is a fine idea, generous, just like you. Over the next several months, they spent their spare time working on Sarah's old ranch together. Harrison brought several of his hired hands to help, and gradually the sad little property was transformed. They rebuilt the cabin, repaired the barn, replaced all the fencing, and cleared the overgrown areas. By the time fall arrived, it was a modest but functional ranch again. I wish my parents could see this, Sarah said as they stood surveying their handiwork one Sunday afternoon. I think they would be proud of you, Harrison said, wrapping his arm around her waist. Not just for fixing this place, but for everything you have done. You are remarkable, Sarah. I am just stubborn, she said with a smile. That too. In November, a young couple arrived in Sweetwater, newly married and looking for land to homestead. Harrison heard about them in town and immediately thought of Sarah's ranch. After discussing it with Sarah, he approached the couple with an offer. They could have the property for a very reasonable price, with the option to pay over time as their circumstances improved. The couple, whose name was Miller, nearly wept with gratitude. They moved in before winter set in, and Sarah felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the ranch her parents had won would finally serve its purpose as a home for a family with dreams. Winter on the Double J was quieter but no less busy. There were animals to care for, equipment to maintain, and the constant work of keeping a ranch running. Harrison taught Sarah to track game in the snow, and she proved to be a surprisingly good shot. They would ride out together on clear days, checking on cattle in distant pastures and enjoying the stark beauty of the Texas winter landscape. On Christmas morning, Harrison gave Sarah a beautiful leather-bound journal. For writing down our story, he said. So we never forget how we found each other. Sarah gave him a new saddle she had commissioned from the leather worker in Sweetwater, using money she had saved from her wages. The craftsmanship was exceptional, and Harrison ran his hands over it with obvious appreciation. This must have cost a fortune, he said. You are worth it, Sarah replied simply. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah began to feel different. She was tired more often, and certain smells that never bothered her before suddenly made her nauseous. It took her several weeks to recognize the signs, and when she finally admitted to herself what was happening, she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She told Harrison one evening after supper as they sat by the fireplace. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms and held her for a long time, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Sarah asked, needing to hear him say it. Sarah, I am more than happy. I am amazed. I am grateful. I am a little terrified, he admitted with a laugh. But mostly, I am just so deeply in love with you and with this life we are building. The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah suffered from morning sickness well into her second trimester, and found the summer heat particularly oppressive as her belly grew. But Harrison was attentive and patient, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her cool water and whatever foods she could tolerate, reading to her in the evenings when she was too uncomfortable to sleep. The ranch wives from neighboring properties came to visit regularly, bringing advice and supplies and telling Sarah their own birth stories, which ranged from encouraging to absolutely terrifying. Harrison hired a woman from town to help with the heavier household work. And slowly, Sarah adjusted to the reality of becoming a mother. In early October of 1873, on a crisp morning with the sky so blue it hurt to look at, Sarah went into labor. Harrison rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing the front room while Sarah labored in their bedroom. Every cry of pain from her made him flinch, and twice he tried to go in, only to be firmly turned away by the midwife. When he finally heard the sharp, indignant wail of a newborn, Harrison burst into the room despite protocol. Sarah lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling. The midwife was wrapping a squirming bundle in soft blankets. "You have a son," the midwife announced. Harrison moved to Sarah's side, taking her hand and kissing her forehead. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are amazing." The midwife placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and both parents gazed down at the tiny, red-faced infant with wonder. He had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes, when they flickered open, seemed to be the same blue-green as his father's. "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Harrison looked down at his son, his expression soft with love. "What about Henry? It was my father's name." "Henry James," Sarah said, testing it out. "I like it. Henry Thomas James for both our fathers." "Perfect," Harrison agreed. The first months with baby Henry were exhausting but filled with joy. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours. Sarah nursed him while Harrison would sit beside them, reading aloud or just watching his son with amazement. When Sarah needed sleep, Harrison would walk Henry around the house, bouncing him gently and singing off key lullabies that somehow always worked. The ranch work continued, though Sarah's role changed during those early months. She focused on tasks she could do with Henry nearby, and Harrison hired additional help to make up the difference. But Sarah chafed at being sidelined, and as soon as she felt strong enough, she was back to her usual routine, often with Henry strapped to her chest in a sling. "You are going to make this boy think everyone lives on a ranch," Harrison teased one afternoon, watching Sarah feed the chickens with Henry sleeping peacefully against her. "Well, everyone should," Sarah replied with a grin. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, the Double J continued to prosper. Harrison and Sarah proved to be excellent partners in every sense. They expanded their cattle operation, bought more land, and invested in better breeding stock. Sarah's head for numbers made her invaluable in managing the ranch's finances, and Harrison's experience and instincts kept the operation running smoothly. Young Henry was walking by his first birthday and causing mischief by his second. He had his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's stubborn determination, a combination that led to many heart-stopping moments. Sarah lost count of how many times she found him trying to climb into the horse corrals or toddle after his father toward the cattle. "He is going to give us gray hair before we are 30, she complained to Harrison one evening after fishing their son out of a water trough for the third time that week. "Just like his mother," Harrison said with a laugh, "determined to do everything himself no matter how hard it is." By the time Henry turned 3, Sarah was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1877, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sophia Marie. Where Henry had been loud and demanding from birth, Sophia was quiet and observant, her dark eyes seeming to take in everything around her. "Look at her," Sarah whispered as Harrison held his daughter for the first time. "She already looks wise." "She gets that from you," Harrison said softly. With 2 children, life on the ranch became even more chaotic, but no less fulfilling. Henry was fascinated by his baby sister, though he could not quite understand why she could not play with him immediately. Sarah found herself running the household with the same efficiency she had once applied to ranch work, managing feeding schedules, diaper changes, a rambunctious toddler, and still finding time to help Harrison with the books and major decisions. The years passed in a blur of children's laughter, hard work, and deep contentment. The Millers, who had bought Sarah's old ranch, became good friends, often riding over for Sunday dinners. Their own family was growing, and the children played together while the adults discussed cattle prices and weather patterns. Sweetwater itself was growing too. More families arrived, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. A new school was built, and when Henry turned 6, Sarah insisted he attend. Harrison was reluctant at first, having learned most of what he knew through practical experience, but Sarah was firm. "I want him to have opportunities we did not have," she argued. "Education will give him choices." Harrison could never deny Sarah anything, especially when she used that particular tone of voice. So Henry went to school, though he complained bitterly about having to sit still for so long. Sophia would start in a few years, and Sarah was already looking forward to those quieter mornings. One evening in the fall of 1880, as they sat on their porch watching Henry and Sophia chase fireflies in the yard, Sarah leaned against Harrison's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You ever think about that first day we met?" she asked. "When I had almost nothing and you offered me work." "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I think about how scared you looked trying to hide it behind pride. I think about how close I came to just riding past the general store that day. My whole life would be different." "Mine too," Sarah said. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Thomas had stayed, or if I had gone back east with him." "Any regrets?" Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one, who had given her purpose and love and a family. "Not a single one. This life, this ranch, these children, it is everything I never knew I wanted." Harrison kissed her softly. "I love you, Sarah James, more today than yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "That is quite a promise," she said with a smile. "One I intend to keep for the rest of my life." The children came running up then, Henry trying to show them a firefly he had caught in his hands while Sophia danced around them excitedly. Harrison scooped up his daughter while Sarah pulled Henry close, and for a moment they were all together, a perfect unit. As the stars came out above the Texas prairie, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss of her parents, the fear and loneliness, her brother's abandonment, the struggle to survive. All of it had led her to Harrison, to this ranch, to this life. She would not change any of it, not even the painful parts, because they had shaped her into the woman she was now. In the years that followed, the Double J continued to grow and prosper. Harrison and Sarah added more land, built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, and became respected members of the Sweetwater community. Henry grew into a tall, strong young man with his father's love of the land and his mother's sharp mind. Sophia proved to be a gifted artist, filling the house with her drawings and paintings. In 1885, Sarah gave birth to their third child, a son they named Samuel. He was a surprise, coming 10 years after Sophia, but a welcome one. If anything, Sam brought new energy to the family, keeping his parents young even as they aged. The ranch became a place of stability in a region that was still finding its footing. During hard times, Harrison and Sarah were known for their generosity, often extending credit to struggling neighbors or hiring men who needed work. They remembered what it was like to have nothing, and that memory informed every decision they made. Thomas wrote occasionally from St. Louis, where he had indeed found work in a printing shop, and eventually started his own business. He married a woman named Catherine and had 2 daughters. He never returned to Texas, but his letters were always warm, and he never failed to thank Sarah for understanding when he had to leave. "I was a coward," he wrote in one letter. "You were the brave one. You always were." Sarah kept all his letters in a box in her dresser, a connection to her past and the family she had lost. She harbored no resentment toward Thomas. Everyone had to find their own path, and his had led him back to civilization while hers had led her deeper into the wild heart of Texas. As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, the Wild West was becoming less wild. Railroads connected distant towns, telegraph lines hummed with messages, and the rough frontier edges were slowly being smoothed away. But on the Double J Ranch, life continued much as it always had, governed by the seasons and the needs of the land and animals. Harrison's hair turned silver at the temples, and Sarah noticed laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they were both still strong and capable, still working the ranch they loved, still deeply in love with each other. Henry, now a grown man of 20, had taken on more responsibility for the ranch operations. He had his father's instincts for cattle and his mother's business sense, and Harrison often said he would have no worries about leaving the ranch in his son's hands when the time came. Sophia, at 17, divided her time between helping on the ranch and her artwork. She had started selling paintings to folks in Sweetwater and even received a commission from a family in Austin. Sarah encouraged her daughter's talents while also making sure she learned all the practical skills she would need. Sam, at 10 years old, was still young enough to find wonder in everything about ranch life. He followed his father everywhere, asking endless questions and getting into the kind of mischief that made Sarah grateful she had survived Henry's childhood. One spring evening in 1895, the entire family gathered on the porch after supper. It had become a tradition over the years, this time when they would sit together and talk about their days. Henry was discussing his plans to expand the southern pasture. Sophia was showing them a new painting, and Sam was begging his father to teach him to rope. Sarah sat in her rocking chair, the same one that had been in her room when she first came to the ranch, and watched her family with a heart so full it almost hurt. This was what her parents had wanted when they set out for Texas all those years ago. Not just land or success, but family, legacy, a place to belong. Harrison caught her eye and smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her. After more than 20 years of marriage, he could still make her heart skip a beat. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Harrison pulled Sarah close. "You remember what I said to you all those years ago, when you were afraid I was going to send you away?" Sarah thought back to those early days, when everything was uncertain and she was fighting so hard just to survive. "Remind me. I told you that this ranch needed your strength. I was not wrong. Everything we have built here, everything good in my life, it is because of your strength. You made me stronger too." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I was not strong, I was terrified." "Being scared and being strong are not opposites," Harrison said gently. "You are both. You are both. And I thank God every day that you did not give up, that you fought for yourself and for us." "You made it easy to stay," Sarah whispered. "You gave me reason to hope again." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built something beautiful together. Outside, the Texas night was alive with crickets and night birds. The ranch slept peacefully around them, a testament to years of hard work and love. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, her last thought was one of gratitude. For the difficult journey that had brought her here, for the cowboy who had seen her worth when she was at her lowest, for the family they had created, and for every single day of the life they shared. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. The turn of the century came and went, and the James family celebrated at a big gathering with all their neighbors and friends. Henry announced his engagement to a sweet young woman named Ruth from a neighboring ranch, and the whole county turned out for the wedding the following spring. Sophia eventually left for St. Louis to study art more seriously, staying with her Uncle Thomas and his family. It was hard for Sarah to watch her daughter go, but she remembered her own need for independence and did not stand in her way. Sophia returned after 2 years with refined skills and a quiet young man named Paul who she married in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Sam grew into a capable young rancher, eventually taking over most of the daily operations as Harrison slowed down. He was serious and dedicated, and Sarah often saw echoes of the man she had first met in her youngest son's steady determination. Harrison and Sarah, now in their 50s, spent more time on the porch and less time in the saddle, though Harrison still insisted on riding out to check the herd regularly. They had built a legacy they could be proud of, and now they were content to watch the next generation carry it forward. Grandchildren arrived in due time. Henry and Ruth had 3 boys who ran wild on the ranch just as their father had. Sophia and Paul had twin girls who showed early signs of their mother's artistic talent. The big house was often full of noise and laughter, and Sarah found that being a grandmother was perhaps the best role she had played yet. On a warm evening in June of 1908, Sarah sat on the porch in her rocking chair, a grandchild sleeping in her lap. She was 60 years old, her hair now more silver than brown, her hands marked by decades of hard work. But she felt content in a way she never had in her youth. Harrison came out and sat beside her, moving a bit slower than he once had but still strong. He reached over and took her free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Beautiful evening," he said. "They all are," Sarah replied. "I notice them more now. Getting philosophical in your old age," she laughed softly, careful not to wake the baby. "Maybe. I was just thinking about how far we have come. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I was that terrified girl with nothing to her name, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago," Harrison said. "A whole lifetime we have lived together. Do you ever wish things had been different? That you had married someone more refined, someone who knew how to be a proper rancher's wife from the start?" Harrison turned to look at her with such love in his eyes that Sarah felt her breath catch, just as it had all those years ago when he first told her he loved her. "Sarah James, I have never wished for a single thing to be different. You were exactly who I needed, who this ranch needed. You brought life and purpose and joy to every corner of this place. You gave me children and grandchildren and more happy days than any man deserves. If I could go back and live it all again, I would not change a moment. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They made us who we are." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and pink. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, of life continuing and growing. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and enduring, a testament to everything they had built together. As the first stars appeared, Harrison squeezed Sarah's hand. "I love you," he said, simple words he had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Sarah replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The sleeping baby stirred and opened her eyes, looking up at Sarah with innocent wonder. Sarah smiled down at her granddaughter, thinking about the future this child would inherit. A future built on the foundation of hard work, determination, and love that she and Harrison had laid down stone by stone, year by year. The Wild West was fading into history, but here on the Double J Ranch, the spirit of those frontier days lived on. Not in gunfights or lawlessness, but in the simple determination to build something good, to work hard, to love deeply, and to never give up, even when the odds seemed impossible. Sarah looked at her husband, her partner, her best friend, and she knew that whatever challenges they had faced, whatever hardships they had overcome, it had all been worth it for this moment, for this life, for this love. Years later, when Sarah was in her 70s and Harrison in his late 70s, they would still sit on that porch most evenings. Their children ran the ranch operations now, and their grandchildren were growing into capable young people. They had lived long enough to see the automobile replace the horse in many places, to see Texas change from frontier territory to modern state. But some things never changed. The land still demanded respect and hard work. Family still mattered most. And love, real love built on partnership and respect, still endured. On a cool October evening in 1922, exactly 50 years after they had first met, Harrison and Sarah sat together watching the sun set. They were old now, their bodies marked by time and labor, but their hands were still intertwined, their love still as strong as ever. 50 years, Sarah said softly. Can you believe it? Best 50 years of my life, Harrison replied. Henry came out to check on them, his own hair now graying. You two need anything. We have everything we need, Sarah told her son with a smile. After Henry went back inside, Harrison turned to Sarah. Do you remember that day in the barn when I told you I loved you and asked you to marry me? Every detail, Sarah said. I was so scared and so hopeful all at once. I could not believe that someone like you could want someone like me. I still cannot believe I was lucky enough to find you, Harrison said. You were the bravest person I ever met, Sarah, braver than any cowboy or gunslinger or soldier. You faced down poverty and loneliness and fear, and you never broke. This ranch does not just need your strength, it was built on it. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. We built it together. Every fence post, every building, every success. It was always us together. They sat there as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful. The ranch would go on after them, passed down to their children and grandchildren, carrying with it the story of a terrified young woman who refused to give up and a quiet cowboy who saw her strength when she could not see it herself. Inside the house, their family gathered, multiple generations under one roof, all of them part of the legacy Harrison and Sarah had created. Outside, the Texas prairie stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful, just as it had been all those years ago when Sarah first arrived with nothing but hope and determination. As Harrison and Sarah sat together in the gathering darkness, their hands still clasped, they were content. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The Wild West they had known was part of history now, but the values that had sustained them, hard work, courage, loyalty, and above all, love, those were timeless. The story that had begun with a desperate young woman and a compassionate cowboy had grown into something neither could have imagined. It had become a family, a legacy, a testament to what was possible when two people committed to building a life together no matter what obstacles stood in their way. And as the night settled over the Double J Ranch, with its barns and pastures and the big house full of family, it was clear that the love story of Harrison and Sarah James was not just about survival or even success. It was about finding home in another person, about building something lasting, and about the quiet courage it takes to love someone fully and completely for a lifetime. Their grandchildren would tell the story to their own children someday, about how great-grandmother Sarah came to Texas with nothing and built an empire through sheer determination, and how great-grandfather Harrison saw her worth when no one else did. They would tell how true love was not just about romance, but about partnership, respect, and choosing each other every single day. But for now, in this moment, Harrison and Sarah simply sat together in the peaceful darkness, grateful for every moment they had been given, for every challenge they had overcome, and for the beautiful life they had built together on the Texas prairie. The end of their story was not an ending at all, but a continuation. Their love would live on in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values. The ranch they had built together would stand as a testament to their partnership. And somewhere in the vast Texas sky, among the endless stars, their story would be remembered as proof that even in the hardest times, love can flourish, strength can overcome, and two souls can find exactly what they need in each other. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, warm and safe in Harrison's arms as she had been for 50 years, her last thought was the same one she had every night. She was grateful. Grateful for the hardships that had brought her to Texas, for the cowboy who had seen her potential, for the life they had built, and for every single moment of their shared journey. Harrison held her close, his own heart full of the same gratitude, and together they slept. Two people who had found their home not in a place but in each other, whose love story had become legend in Sweetwater, and whose legacy would endure for generations to come. The Double J Ranch continued to thrive under the careful stewardship of the James family, and visitors who came there could feel the love that had built it in every corner. The story of Harrison and Sarah became the foundation upon which the family built their lives, a reminder that with courage, determination, and love, anything was possible. And so the story that began with a gunshot and a desperate young woman ended with peace, fulfillment, and a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. It was a true Wild West love story, one that proved that the greatest adventures were not found in gunfights or gold rushes, but in the quiet courage of building a life with someone you loved, one day at a time, forever.